Here's a question that's got a lot of people very bothered the past couple of days. What would you be willing to give up to enjoy some meat on the braai? Well, it started off with a lot of people reacting, thinking this was something of a joke, but it has got a very serious background to this. Animal rights group PETA, P-E-T-A, reckons women should stop having sex with men who eat meat. Now, this after research that men are some of the biggest contributors to climate change because, according to the statistics, men eat a lot more meat than women. So joining us for this discussion is, on the right-hand side of your screen, Director of Animal Assistance Programs for PETA over in Asia. It's Ashley Fruno, and on the left-hand side you'll see it's clinical sexologist Dr. Eve. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Right-hand side is Dr. Eve and Ashley on the left. Dr. Eve, good morning. I'll come to you in just a moment if you don't mind. I'd like to start just with Ashley very quickly. Ashley, a lot of people giving PETA trouble on social media about this. I'd like to just take a moment, if you can, just give me the background how this came about, because a lot of people aren't taking it seriously. Just tell me how you got to this point.
Well, put simply, it's a tongue-in-cheek way to draw attention to this very important issue, and clearly it's working because we're having this discussion today. So the climate crisis is critical right now, and it's something that we all need to do our part to take action to slow down. There are devastating typhoons, there are floods, there are fires, there are heat waves. Some of these things are lethal. They're killing hundreds of people, and we can all do our part to slow down that climate change by very simply enjoying vegan foods.
Help us understand, though, for those who don't quite understand the link between climate change and climate change damage, because I don't think anybody, Ashley, is arguing that. What has that got to do with men eating meat?
It's actually a great question. So as you mentioned, men eat more meat than women do. And these animals are raised on deforested lands, and they're methane-producing animals. And methane is a greenhouse gas that directly affects climate change. So it's actually better for the environment, it's better for your health, and it's better for the animals if we can all enjoy a healthy, plant-based vegan diet.
And I'm going to speak to Dr. Eve in a moment, Doctor. I'm not holding you off deliberately. I just want to make sure I get the other angle of this, Dr. Eve. But Ashley, I want to then talk about this, as you say, tongue-in-cheek possibly, but why go for the angle of asking women to stop having sex with men? Why go that route? Some people are saying there's other ways of doing this. It was either tongue-in-cheek and it's maybe gone off track slightly, or you're serious about it. Which is it?
Well, it is tongue-in-cheek. However, everybody has control over their own relationships and what happens in them, certainly. For us, I feel that communication is the most important aspect of a relationship. And in my previous relationships, I've not needed to withhold sex because it's easy enough to just communicate with that person, to share with them why veganism is the right path to choose, and introduce them to a wide array of healthy, delicious, plant-based foods. So whether or not you choose to take it seriously or what you do in your relationship is ultimately up to you. But we do think that it's important for men to realize the impact that their diet is having on the world around us.
And Dr. Eve, a well-known sexologist, has been on radio for years. Anyone, I'm sure, will recognize the voice, the face, and all the articles you've written as well. Dr. Eve, good morning to you. And the criticism around this, and tell me what you think, Doctor, is this is, in a way, weaponizing sex. Is that an unfair way of looking at this?
Well, Gareth, my first thought, first of all, let me just say that I am a plant-eating person. I don't eat meat either, so I'm very much in favor of the initiative of that. But I kind of had to check my calendar and say, what am I? Am I in year 411 BCE? Am I living in the time of Aristophanes, who wrote a play called Lysistrata? And that was an incredible play telling women to go on sex strike to stop men having war. So they got the woman to strike with sex to stop war. So I think it's quite a fun and creative initiative to be able to do that. However, it has other implications, of course, which are quite damaging in terms of what we think about men, and actually embedding myths which are incorrect around men. It gives a feeling of men are uncontrolled in their sexuality, that men are just almost animalistic in their ways, and it's almost a shaming thing towards men and masculinity in general, and trying to control male male sexuality is something which I think, is not a good idea to be able to do that and to give women the power to be able to do that. Well, that's in a heteronormative kind of environment. So I think it's, creative, but I also think it has some shortcomings to it in terms of shaming and blaming, and also trying to take, control away, believing that men, as I say, don't have any control over their sexuality and need women to control their sexuality, which is a bit of a reverse, because it's normally, men who are encouraged to control women's sexuality. So yeah, I think it is. I think it has some harm to it as well.
And Ashley, I suppose this is what is sadly where the conversation is going, that while the intentions, as Dr. Eve said, many people would agree with the aim of the campaign, it's been derailed now because we're having to now have these conversations around sex, because that's now what we're talking about, aren't we? We're not just talking about climate change, Ashley. We're talking about exactly what Dr. Eve just spoke about. Your reaction to what Dr. Eve said, Ashley?
Well, I think, first of all, we might not even be having this conversation today if PETA hadn't done this. And I don't want to say whether I'm right or wrong in that aspect, but I think there's a big possibility that I wouldn't even be on the show had PETA not suggested a sex strike. Yeah. So we're having this conversation about veganism and having this conversation about climate change because of PETA's tongue-in-cheek suggestion. And I do agree with some things that were mentioned. However, I would also say that masculinity is wrongly associated with eating meat. And what we're trying to get out there is you don't have to eat meat to be masculine. It's actually more attractive to women to have compassionate men who care about the animals, the environment, and care enough about their own health to make this choice. And we're not saying that men are animalistic. We're simply saying that men love sex, women do, but I think we tend to be a little bit better sometimes at withholding it. So we're just simply suggesting that it might be a way to get your man's attention and make them realize how important a vegan diet or a vegan lifestyle is to you, and be a conversation starter in your relationship to discuss this issue and hopefully to be able to enjoy vegan meals together.
I suppose, Dr. Even, I'm not disagreeing. Actually, I think many people will agree with it about having an open, honest conversation within your relationship as well. But Dr. Eve, I suppose where you were going earlier, and tell me if I've gone off track slightly here, is what you're now ending up with is in a situation where sex between a mutually consenting couple now becomes conditional, doesn't it? I will do it if you do the following. And that's very dangerous, I would imagine.
Right, it's very controlling, and also I do object to the heteronormative language that is being used. We do have trans men, we have trans women, we have non-binary people as well. So who are you really talking to? Who is this campaign really aimed at? So I think one needs to be, very sensitive to that as well. But the shaming and the putting into categories of this is how men are, this is how women are, this is what we need to be doing, I think is objectionable. And also, I get that the research says that men eat more meat, but really, women eat meat too. Are we ever going to say, what would happen if we were to say, men, you've got to stop women eating meat? I think there'd be an uproar around that as well. So, yeah, so we can't use sex, as you say, we can't weaponize sex, Gareth, and we can't be using sexuality, which is something which should be around pleasure and is everybody's right, that we shouldn't be using that as a way to really get a message across, which has negative implications around sexuality.
Yeah, Ashley, and I get your point that, if we hadn't used the word sex in here, you and I probably wouldn't be talking, because people don't, and they should be taking climate change, Ashley, more seriously. But if we hadn't thrown the word sex in there, we wouldn't have Dr. Eve. You and I wouldn't be talking. So that has worked. But I can't help but wonder, take me into the boardroom of PETA. What was option 2? Surely there were a couple of ideas running around. This was to get everybody's attention. It's worked. But what was option 2? Or have we just gone for the extreme version here? Because the messaging looks like and sounds like the optics are getting a bit lost for me.
Well, I certainly can't reveal what's up our sleeve in the future, but I can tell you that the vast majority of PETA's work actually occurs out of the public eye. So we work with companies and corporations on making changes that affect animals. We also do direct animal rescue efforts. We have celebrity campaigns and investigations, which are also routinely featured in media. However, I do have to say that this particular suggestion, or this sex strike idea, is something that is getting more media attention than most things that we do. And that is obviously because as a society, we're very interested in sex And I don't think the message is getting lost. Again, it's a tongue-in-cheek way of getting people to talk about this issue, of realizing the importance of making these changes in your diet, because the climate crisis is critical, and we all have to act now if we want to slow down climate change.
Dr. Eve, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind me asking you this question as I say goodbye to Ashley for the moment. Ashley, don't go anywhere. I'm going to give Dr. Eve the last word on this. You said that you have a plant-based diet as well. How would you then, if somebody, as Ashley is suggesting, to have a serious conversation in a consenting adult relationship, whether it's male-male, female-female, whatever it might be, that is your business. How would you do that? Because this does come across as very adversarial towards men in our country. If somebody watching this tonight goes, all right, honey, let's have a chat, how do you have this discussion?
So you know what came up for me, Gareth, and I guess because I live in South Africa and work so much with gender-based violence, I was thinking about the high risk that such a conversation could have, that one really needs to be cautious if you're in a relationship with somebody where there is a certain amount of violence, or there has been violence, or there's a risk of violence, to be able to raise an issue and say, I'm going to withhold sex from you unless you stop eating meat. That may put the woman in a higher risk of violence towards her. So it is something that one needs to think about before one gets into such a conversation with the man. What is your risk of getting hurt if I'm going to lay a condition and say I'm going to withhold sex from you just because I think it's good for the climate? Please take into consideration what the implications are for you as a woman if you're going to be doing something like that.
Yeah, so it's a very serious question around the climate, and I don't think anyone's denying that this is perhaps going to get a lot of people talking and upset a lot of people, sadly, but the point is taken. Director of Animal Assistance Programs for PETA over in Asia, Ashley Fruno, I appreciate your time, and clinical sexologist Dr. Eve. So there is the background to what a lot of people have been talking about around the world and around the country. I can't help but wonder if in the end the conversation is being diluted and the message is possibly going to get lost. All right.